Hello, my name is Gregory H. Arabian. I'm Judge Advocate of Post 41, Watertown, Massachusetts. And we are engaged in the oral history project for Post 41 AMVETS, which is also being run in conjunction with the program of the Library of Congress. Today we have a member of Post 41, V. Sookikian, of Waltham, Massachusetts, who is a member of Post 41 and a veteran. I'm going to be asking you a few questions today, V, and just give us whatever memory you have about your service. First of all, were you drafted or did you enlist in the service?
Oh no, I wasn't drafted. My father volunteered in World War I, and I could do no less.
Now, where did your father come from?
He came from Turkish Armenia as a result of the genocide.
The nationalist Armenians like to refer to that as Turkish occupied Armenia. And did he see the genocide, or did he experience the genocide before he came over?
No, he didn't. He was trying to get out just before the genocide. In fact, he was on the high seas when it happened.
This was in the 1915s?
Yes.
Okay. And he volunteered for World War I?
He did.
And
in the infantry.
He was in the infantry?
Yes, and in fact he was at Fort Devens here.
I see. And did you have any war stories that he told you about?
He peeled a lot of potatoes.
And where did he serve?
He served here in the States.
In the States.
And fortunately the war ended before he saw any action.
Okay. Now you went in the service when?
Well, I enlisted in the Air Corps Enlisted Reserve when a recruiter came to my high school in 1944. And little did we know that our Air Force was taking a beating over Germany in 43 and 44. And personnel problems were such that the Army thought they'd better get a reserve.
A recruiting program going.
A recruiting program going, so my entire class volunteered with me along with them.
Really?
Yes.
And that was from high school?
That was high school, July of 44.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing the recruiter emphasized is they wouldn't take us until we graduated from high school. So I had until January 45,
and
at which time I graduated.
And that was what high school?
Harron High School Aviation Annex. I was studying aircraft engine and mechanics.
Okay, but what was the name of the high school?
Harron High School.
Harron?
In New York City. It was the first high school devoted to teaching aeronautics.
Really?
Yes.
It says here that you enlisted in July 26 of 1944.
That's right. It was in a program called the Air Corps Enlisted Reserve. We were specifically going for a chance at air combat crews, be it pilot, bombardier, or navigator.
Didn't this get you a little scared when you talked about combat?
No, it didn't.
It didn't?
No.
What were you thinking of when they came and said that we want you to enlist in the Air Force? Or the Army?
Oh, great. I'll have a chance to fly.
Really?
Yes.
Did you have any flying experience before that time?
Oh, I had only gone up once at LaGuardia Field.
In what?
In a Stinson Reliant high-wing monoplane.
Yeah, I see. And you didn't pilot it, I assume?
I didn't, but I wanted to get my hands on those controls.
You did. And ever since then you wanted to go flying?
That's right.
And you didn't mind going into combat in those days?
Well, not until basic training was over and I had accepted my classification as a B-29 tail gunner.
Mm-hmm. So, after you enlisted, where did they send you?
I took basic training at Keesler Field, Biloxi, Mississippi.
Uh-huh. And what did that training consist of?
Pardon?
What did that training consist of after boot camp?
Well, actually, after boot camp.
Yeah.
After basic training? After basic training, I accepted my classification, and the next day I read in the newspaper a B-29 tail gunner had fallen in the Sea of Japan, and I said, oh my God, these guys get killed.
Okay. And
what have I done?
Yes. So what happened then?
Well, the day after that, the second atom bomb dropped, and Japan surrendered.
That was on Nagasaki.
Yes.
Had you ever flown in a B-29?
No, I never got to a plane, and I never flew in the service.
Mm-hmm. Had you ever seen a B-29?
I had never seen one, no.
Yeah. But your training consisted of aerial gunnery?
I never did get to training school because when the war ended, they needed clerk typists to ship these guys home.
Okay.
So I went to Lowry Field in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, and I learned the Army way of doing things.
I see.
I had already taken typing in high school, and that was one of my choices when I went into the service. I took a bunch of tests, and they qualified me to be a teletypist, a cryptographer, a clerk typist, and so on.
But you still had a specialization as an aerial gunner in the tail of a B-29.
That was the classification to enable me to go to gunnery school.
I see.
But I never did go to gunnery school.
Okay.
They sent me to clerk typist school instead.
So you were in from July 26 of 1944 to October 26 of 1946? Is that it?
I was in the reserve,
I see.
at which time I finished my school. I joined the Civil Air Patrol, and we marched the silent drill called a monkey drill at war bond fundraising events, and we did the silent drill to entertain the potential buyers of war bonds.
I see. Now, when you say that you enlisted because your father served ahead of you, you enlisted willingly and you wanted to join?
Yes, I did.
The service.
That was a patriotic thing to do. I was in Boy Scouts, and one by one our older leaders would be marching off to war. So they were a good example of patriotism to us.
Where was your Boy Scout training?
My Boy Scout training was in Brooklyn, New York.
And what troop were you with over there?
Troop 2, Brooklyn. It was mostly Armenians, as a matter of fact. And some of those guys were in the Air Force.
And who sponsored the troop?
The Central Branch YMCA in Brooklyn, at Hanson Place in Brooklyn.
And did you undergo any skills while you were with the Boy Scouts, such as code and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I was on the Morse code team, and we learned how to make fire without matches. We learned how to take care of ourselves, camping, tenting, hiking. Oh boy, did we hike.
Did that training help you in your service later on?
Absolutely, there's no question about it. I'll tell you a story. While in basic training, we went on bivouac, and 4 of us had to sleep in 2 pup tents put together. Well, that night it rained cats and dogs, Greg, and in the morning we discovered that our tent was the only one that was dry. And when we started talking about our backgrounds, we discovered that 3 out of 4 of us were Boy Scouts.
Isn't that something? And so it did help you in your later training.
It helped me for everything from taking care of myself to learning how to marching and drilling, because our troop did those things.
And would you recommend that youngsters today should have some kind of Boy Scout training, whether or not they go into the service? Is it a helpful thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And you're still, at the age that you are now, you're still involved in Boy Scout work.
Yes, I am.
And how do you find today's Boy Scouts?
Today's Boy Scouts, well, they're just like we kids were. They're anxious to get the adventure of outdoor living and learning new skills and having an opportunity to bring the best of themselves out.
Okay. Now, when you were in the service, you say that many of your high school friends went in the service with you.
Yes.
You say the whole class volunteered.
The whole class volunteered.
I see. And when you were in the service, did you have any of these high school buddies with you in the same class, or with you in the service?
No, we were in a class of all whose names began with S from all over the country.
Okay. And did you meet with any of these former students during or after your service? period?
No, the only one I met was one of my former Boy Scout friends.
Really?
And that was at the port of debarkation in Bremerhaven when we were coming home after my service in the Army of Occupation.
Tell us about your service abroad.
My service abroad consists of sending home veteran troops, billeting the fresh troops coming overseas, and housing them until such times as they would transfer to their permanent duties.
So you spent a lot of time in what we call the Army of Occupation in Europe, is that
Yes.
it? I see. And while you were there, did you come across those veterans who had actually seen combat?
Yes. During the 3-day train trip from Le Havre to Munich, at various sightings, a troop train would pass us, and we'd look at these war veterans who had no emotion. They couldn't believe they were going home.
Really?
Yes. And some of them looked so tough that we were actually afraid of them.
Really?
Yes.
And
You know Bill Maudlin, up front with Maudlin?
Oh, yes.
He used to draw the combat veterans with slashes across their eyes because they had no emotion.
really?
The combat experience had drained all that human feeling out of them.
Had you talked to any of these people? Did you get to talk to any of these people?
Not the real hardcore combat veterans. They were pretty silent. They
were.
couldn't believe their good luck in surviving. But at the station, there were some veterans who were waiting to go to accumulate enough points to go to the cigarette camps on the coast of France, from where they would pick up ships and go home.
Now, Munich was a pretty heavily Nazi area, wasn't it?
It was heavily Nazi and it was heavily bombed.
Yes.
I have photographs of the bombed out buildings and so forth. And being in the Air Force, we were told, if you go to Munich, take off your Air Force shoulder patch.
Really?
Because you don't know how much hatred they have towards the bombers.
Really? And did you have occasion to go outside your immediate military area to go in and view some of that local area?
Well, the nearby local area was an untouched town. However, 15 miles away was the infamous Dachau concentration camp.
Uh-huh.
And the military wanted us to get on trucks and go out and visit, but I couldn't bring myself about to see that horror.
So they wanted witnesses to what they did at Dachau?
That's right. They wanted all the servicemen. Well, at least they gave an opportunity for every serviceman to visit Dachau.
And how did you get out there?
On Army trucks.
Army truck. And you say it was heavily bombed. What were the conditions of the roads? Were the roads cleared?
Yeah, the roads were cleared. Although when we drove the Autobahn, we could see dropped bridges that had been bombed.
Mm-hmm.
They did just enough to let convoys go through.
Well, you say there were some untouched areas in Munich?
Oh, not in Munich, in the countryside. It seems as though Munich was pinpointed.
I see.
And the surrounding area was not touched at all.
Describe the surrounding areas for us.
Farmland.
Mostly farmland.
Farmland, buildings, farmhouses, small villages. It was quite a distance from major cities.
Did you have an opportunity to mix in with the local color at all?
Yes, our permanent party enlisted man's club would have dances and socials for the GIs.
So you say permanent party clubs and so forth, but you didn't go out into the German-occupied, well, the German areas, the German, the local German-occupied shops.
Oh yes,
And
I
you
went
did?
into town. I would go alone sometimes. Therein lied a little danger because one winter night, the winter of 45, 46, I was walking into town alone and some boys were coming towards me. And after they passed, they figured I was harmless, so they let me have it with snowballs.
In other words, there still was some hatred towards the U.S. soldier.
I can honestly say that these boys didn't have any hatred, and I'll further qualify that by saying one day a colonel addressed the enlisted men and asked if there were any scout leaders in the group. I raised my hand. He said, well, we need you to help us reorganize the German Boy Scout program.
Mm-hmm.
Meet us in town at such a time and place. Well, I went into town and place, knocked on the door, and I walked into a meeting room with about 40 or 50 young boys,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of older boys who might have been in the Wehrmacht. And we waited for this colonel to come, and he and the first sergeant never came. I found myself alone with over 40 young German boys. But all they were interested in, what the Boy Scout program was about, and what did an 18-year-old American eat for breakfast.
Really? And what were you wearing at that time? Were you wearing your Air Force uniform?
Oh yes, I was wearing my uniform.
But without the patch?
Well, you know, they had endured so many years of war, they could tell a veteran
Yes.
from
someone who was not an actual combatant.
yes.
Mm-hmm. Did you visit any hospitals over there?
Oh, I'm sorry to say I did. I visited German civilian hospitals because the venereal disease rate had been going up in the occupied forces, and the Army wanted us to see with our own eyes what venereal disease was.
This is because of the fraternization between American and German
Yes,
population?
that's right. So we went into the nearby town in Munich, and we saw male cases of venereal disease. Now, when we had gone into the hospital, some girls from the window were waving to us and trying to get our attention and so forth. And naturally, the GIs waved back and so forth.
Yes.
And then we went through the hospital, and on the way back, we were getting in the trucks to go back to our base, and one of the guys said, "What are those girls about up there?" And they said, "Well, they're the female cases of venereal disease."
Mm.
So we stopped the waving and the attempts at fraternization.
Did you see anybody with combat wounds over there, combat injuries?
No, but we did have a suicide on the base.
Mm-hmm.
A Native American had killed himself, unfortunately, because of the stress he had endured.
Now, tell me, you say you went into a hospital, yet Munich was heavily bombed. What kind of facilities did this hospital have? Was it untouched? Had it been bombed? Was it rehabilitated?
I did not see any effective bombing. It wasn't a first-class hospital,
Mm-hmm.
not like the 97 General in Frankfurt where my buddy worked, and I later visited.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were in Munich, were you close to the center of the city?
I went all over. We had freedom. Generally, it was the Red Cross Club.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, one night I found myself at MP headquarters.
You did. Okay.
Yes.
And,
well, let me explain, Greg,
ahead.
please. Yeah. The bus that brought us there had left early, so we
Yes.
found ourselves in the city after curfew.
uh-huh. What was
no
curfew,
fault
by the
of
way?
our own.
What was curfew?
11 o'clock.
11
at night.
o'clock. Mm-hmm.
That's hardly a decent hour for
Yes,
an active
yes, I understand.
life.
I understand. Okay. Now, other than when you say that you were involved in the occupation of Germany, were you involved in the rehabilitation of these areas? You interplayed with the German people who might be you might rehabilitate the Boy Scout program, and you were involved in bringing some of our soldiers back and taking care of their billeting. What else were you involved in?
Oh, sightseeing, furloughs to Paris,
Mm-hmm.
3-day passes to Garmisch
Mm-hmm.
and other resort areas in the Bavarian Alps.
Now, how did you feel going from Germany to Paris? I mean, Paris was also seeing some bombing and destruction.
Well, let me tell you how I got there in the first place, Greg.
Okay.
It's an interesting story. I'll tell you a little bit about the psyche of the German people. It was a complicated thing getting tickets to Paris. And I found myself running all over Munich to the American Express company to buy my tickets. And by the time I got to the train station, I only had a few minutes to get to the ticket window. See, the first thing I got was an authorization to go to Paris, and then the next thing was with this authorization to get the ticket. Well, there was a long line at the ticket window. I looked at my watch, and I would never make the train. And the thought of being stuck in Munich and waiting for the next train wasn't very comfortable for me. And I thought, well, I'm an American soldier. I should just barge up to that line, and to the front of the line.
Right.
But I didn't. But the guy next to me must have read my mind, because he said just those words. He says, "You're an American. You can go up to the front line and demand a ticket."
Really?
So I walked up the front line, plunked down my authorization, and said I must have a ticket now.
Really?
And without a word, they gave me the ticket, and I
You
made
were
the
civilian.
train.
So these people ahead of you were civilians,
They were all civilians.
and you.
They
you
respected military authority.
They did. Okay. Did you feel that they resented you?
No, I didn't get that feeling.
Okay. Tell us more about these washed-out veterans that you saw going back. Did you have any other opportunities to interact with them, to talk with them, to see them, to observe them?
I don't know whether I was fortunate or unfortunate, but no. It was only on the rail transportation back that I had this close association with true combat veterans.
How were they dressed when you saw them?
Well, it was winter. It was November, and they had their overcoats on.
They have service caps? Did they have helmets? Did they have? Well, how were they? Did they have?
They had service caps, overseas
Service
caps
caps.
like you're wearing.
Okay. And do they have any sidearms?
No,
No.
no, they didn't have any weapons with them.
What was the situation with regard to whether or not the serviceman over there had an opportunity to protect himself with a sidearm? Were you issued, or were you allowed to have sidearms?
Well, only when we acted as on guard duty.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I was corporal of the guard a few times, and we were issued carbines with 3 rounds.
3 rounds.
3 rounds. And it was my job to put the post on, put the men on their individual posts, and then round them out at the end of 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The closest I came to combat was when one fellow on guard duty at a very dark, wooded corner of the field didn't respond to my call for post number 3. And I went looking for him, and suddenly I found myself staring at the muzzle of his carbine.
Really?
And when I asked him what the problem was, and didn't he know he had one in the chamber,
Yeah.
and he said, "It's dark out here, I'm afraid."
I see. Okay. Now, how were the utilities in Munich when you got there? Did they have electricity? Did they have water? Did they have light, electricity, water, and gas, and all this sort of thing?
It appeared that they did.
They had utilities.
Yes.
Mhm.
And they had cleaned up the streets pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Did you observe the German civilians cleaning up the area?
I don't remember that.
Because it was very heavily bombed, as you say, and there must have been an awful lot of buildings that were destroyed.
They seemed to be in a static state. I never did see any activity where rubble was being removed. I have pictures of the bombed out buildings, and it was almost as though they didn't know what to do with them, but they knew they had to clean up the streets and sidewalks to move.
When you left when did you leave Munich? In October of '46?
I left Germany in October of '46.
When you left in '46, what was the condition of the city? Was it still in a bombed out state?
Yeah. I didn't actually see signs of major construction, if any at all.
What about the use of former German officials in the rehabilitation of Germany? It was pretty tough. Was it pretty tough to find Germans who were not Nazis, who were in authority and who helped you rehabilitate the buildings, the physical plant of the city? Come across any of that?
I didn't come across any of that. The only thing I came across was the use of German prisoners of war in cleaning up our base.
Did you interact with the prisoners of war, German prisoners of war?
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
To my surprise.
Go ahead.
I had seen too many war movies, and I knew that soldiers are soldiers, no matter what country they represent. And these people were no doubt on low rations. And the day they were sweeping the area, I was watching them. And I was down in the basement where there was some K rations left over. And this guy was coming towards me, and they knew better than us where what was on the base.
Right.
So he knew I was in the ration basement, and he came close to me, and he kept looking at me, and I figured this guy wants some food. So
Did you have any fear?
I had no fear at the time, but what I did was I put a K ration near the fence so that if he wanted, he could pick it up.
I see. You were not authorized to give them this.
That's right. I did something knowingly that I probably should not have done.
Did that start any kind of a riot or anything like that?
No,
Or
nothing
did the
of
other
that
people
sort.
want to be treated the same way?
No one else came towards me.
Did you feel that these Nazi prisoners of war regretted what they did, or understood that what they did was wrong? What was their attitude that you could discover, the best that you could describe?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think they were still of the opinion that they could have won the war.
Really?
Yes, the older veterans that had survived were arrogant.
They were.
For example, when I was on guard duty, two older, healthy men, who obviously were veterans from their clothing, came across my post. So I challenged them. And with English, which they pretended not to understand and kept walking. So I decided to use a little German. Achtung, I said.
Yeah.
And again, they didn't pay any attention to me. They could tell I was a young, inexperienced soldier. And even though I had a gun, they did not show any fear. I mean, anybody knows you have a gun, you're the boss. Not these fellas.
Really?
Yes. So what was I to do? Now, you asked me what I learned in basic training. We had combat veteran instructors. And they told us that sometime we might be on guard duty, we might have this problem. And they said, if anybody gives you any trouble, just pull back the bolt on your piece,
Yeah.
and you'll see how fast they stop.
Really? So,
That's all I did
when you
was-
say they came to your post, where were you standing?
I was standing by the periphery fence.
I see. And they were coming into the fence? Or
They,
going out?
they were at the end of their work tour, and they were going out.
And it was your duty to keep them in?
Well, my duty wasn't exactly spelled out. They sort of said, well, you'll know what to do when you see it.
Oh, I see.
So the general rules of guard duty is that you challenge whoever's near your post, and if
Yeah.
you have any questions, you simply march them off to the corporal of the guard.
I see.
So that's what I did.
And he attended to them. But they listened to you once you pulled the bolt of your
Once
rifle.
they heard a round entering the chamber,
Yeah.
they stopped.
They did. Okay. But what about some of these? You say these were older veterans.
Yes.
What what did you observe about their condition, comparing them to the condition of the American combat veteran going back? Were they similarly void of feeling?
No, no.
Were they spirited more?
They were, I would say, a couple of levels beyond that. They
Yeah.
were already home.
Oh, I see.
You
Yes,
see.
that's right.
That's probably the difference.
Right.
They,
And this was not your home, this was their home.
this was their home, and they were home, and they weren't going to be killed any longer.
I see.
Until our GIs, combat GIs, went home and met their mothers and wives and loved ones, they probably couldn't believe that they had survived.
I see. And so these prisoners that you interacted with, what other experiences did you have with them that gave you some feelings as to how they felt about the war? Were they still dedicated Nazis?
I couldn't tell from that, and I had, other than that one incident, I didn't have any dealings with them.
Okay.
Except when we went into town to pick up troops that had come in by train or other way, the Jeep driver told me that if I ever went in alone, to make sure I kept the windshield up, because there were still cases of wire being strung across the road.
Ah, okay.
And the front of the Jeep had a cutting bar installed.
Yes. Yes,
For just
yes.
that eventuality. So there obviously was some hatred still
Yeah.
in the winter of '45.
When you say the Jeep had a cutting bar, is that like a post in front of the Jeep?
Like a angle iron
An angle iron, okay.
to break any wire so it wouldn't
Yes.
decapitate the driver
I see.
and the passenger.
Okay. Now, tell me about some of the, when you say social activities, you say
Which
they had
activities?
social activities?
Yes.
Were there any social activities there? Was the USO there, for instance?
In Munich, there was a U.S. Oh yes, yeah. We had a pretty big base. It was the Randolph Field of Germany.
What was it called?
It was called. Well, it was in the town of Fürstenfeldbruck.
In where?
Fürstenfeldbruck.
Fürstenfeldbruck, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. And what was your unit when you were there?
Well, I was in headquarters detachment 134th Replacement Battalion.
Okay.
And I was in the troop movement office that took care of all the paperwork.
And
I have an interesting story
this was the
to
U.S.
tell.
Army?
This was the Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps?
That's right.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. Go
I
right
dealt
ahead.
only with the Air Corps.
Okay.
I have an interesting story
Go
to
right
tell.
ahead.
One day a knock came on my door, and in walked a general. Me, I'm all alone. A general, my goodness, what do I do? Well, he asked me how things were going. So I told him.
What did you tell him?
I told him that we had more men than orders.
All right.
It turned out that was the worst possible thing I could have said.
Really?
Because the next day he went to see my commanding officer, and he says, "What's this I hear that Sookikian says we've got more men than orders?"
Okay.
Well, the commanding officer called me in. Remember, I'm only 18.
Yes, yes.
Commanding officer called me in and said, "B, never, ever again tell a commanding officer the truth."
In other words, he's of the opinion that the people that didn't have orders were simply lounging around doing nothing?
That's right.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I was supposed to have said, "Everything's fine, sir. If you want to know any more, go see the commanding officer."
Ah, okay.
And-
All right, I see. So, was your commanding general, was your commanding officer a general as well?
No, he was a lieutenant.
Okay,
Lieutenant Bannerman
okay.
of the Air Force, and
Okay.
later it was Lieutenant Alfred, a combat fighter pilot, by the way.
And you say you were with the Army Air Corps. Did you have aircraft around your area?
We had B-17s coming in,
You did. What did they
and
come in with?
DC-3s.
Did they come in with supplies? Were they using the bombers as supply aircraft?
I really don't know what they were doing, but the field wasn't long enough for the planes they wanted to bring in, like B-29s.
I see. And did you have some fighter planes there?
Not that I saw.
Okay. And How did you get along with your commanding officer, some of your other, you say you were in a pretty large base, but you were in headquarters squadron, were you?
Yes.
And how many people did you interact with over there?
In my direct outfit?
Director?
Yeah, a dozen.
About a dozen?
Yeah.
Okay. And they took care of, what did you call it there? You called it a battalion?
Reinforcement battalion.
And how many people?
Actually, troop movement.
Roughly how many in the battalion? Or would they come and go?
That was about the total number.
And did you find that it was easy to get recruits to replace you after you left? Were these new people coming in, were they also combat veterans, or were they newly recruited people that were replacing you?
Yes, the new people coming in were fresh GIs, or in some cases they were veterans who had gone to the States for various things. I remember one night, 3 men came in. I looked at their orders, and they had been at an infamous disciplinary barracks in the Midwest. And the name escapes me right now. But they came in at midnight, all was quiet, I was the one on duty, and I had to take them to my barracks. But I had no fear of them, because you could tell these men had the problem removed from their souls.
Oh, I see. Okay. Did you have any entertainers come to see you?
Yes. As a matter of fact, the USO did come.
Who brought? Who did they bring? Any idea?
Well, they brought local talent. We didn't. You know, the war was over, and we didn't need the Bob Hopes and the Betty Grabels, but we had German civilian performers.
Did you appreciate that?
Oh yes, it was top-rate entertainment. The magic acts, the dances, they were superb.
But these were German entertainers.
These are German, but they're just like you and me.
Okay. And did you keep a personal diary when you were there?
No.
How was your, at this time, were you married?
No, I wasn't, but I had met my wife-to-be, and so I was keeping up a steady correspondence.
And what about your parents? Were you corresponding with your
Oh
parents?
yes, yeah.
And how did they feel about your service?
Well, peculiarly enough, my father, who had volunteered in World War I, did not want to sign the papers for me to volunteer. So I had to work through my mother, convincing him that it was better to fly and die in the sky than in the mud.
Mud of the muck.
Mud of the muck.
And when you were in the service, did you correspond with your father?
No, I would write to my mother and sister.
Yeah.
My father's English was not up to it.
Did you have occasion to talk to them on the telephone and things like that?
The only time we talked on the telephone was when we got word we were coming home.
I see. How did you feel when you knew you were going to come home?
Elated.
You didn't want to stay there
I
anymore?
didn't want to stay anymore. I had met my wife-to-be, and I wanted, it's been a year, and I wanted so much to see her again.
I see.
Besides, it was pretty boring.
It was.
Yeah.
And the destruction was still evident all over the place, is that it?
Excuse me?
Was the destruction of the area
Oh,
still
yeah,
quite evident?
I didn't see any signs of reconstruction except some scaffolding in Frankfurt.
Did you ever go back there after 1946? Ever go back to Europe?
No, never. Except England.
Now, besides Munich, did you see any other areas in Germany, such as Dresden, any of these other towns, Berlin?
Well, I visited my friend in Frankfurt at the 97 General Hospital, and
describe the conditions in Frankfurt in 1946.
it was very much like Munich. There were bombed out areas, but where the hospital was the IG Farben chemical works buildings. And it looked like the hospital had always been a hospital, but the surrounding buildings looked like office buildings.
Had the hospital been bombed?
No.
And what kind of people did you see in the hospital? Did you see people with combat wounds and things like that?
No, they had been sent home. It was the usual that happens to anybody overseas. Some had been in car accidents. Unfortunately, some had been, some had venereal disease.
Right. And besides Frankfurt, and how far is Frankfurt from Munich?
Oh, it's a day's journey. It's on the Marne River.
Is that by jeep?
It's close to, it's closer to France
I see.
than it is to.
And you say you went to Garmisch.
I went to Garmisch. I went to Berchtesgaden. I saw Hitler's Eagle's Nest. I saw.
Tell us something about Berchtesgaden.
Berchtesgaden is a, as it is today, was a country atmosphere place. It was a tourist haven then, as it is now. It had quaint homes, Alpen style. The
Yes.
men wore leather hose, leather hosen, which is
Yes.
pants, and the entertainment was that foot stamping, face slapping dance that the alpinists have.
Now, the John Toland, who's a famous Pulitzer Prize winner, says that they had urged Hitler to retire to Berchtesgaden before the end of the war and continue the war from that site. Can you tell us whether or not that was a defensible site where he could have continued a defensive war against the Allies?
Well, I think it was because of the mountainous terrain.
It is mountainous.
And because obviously the people and the army knows it far better than the Allies would have. So.
How well populated was it?
Well, it wasn't very heavily populated, surprisingly. I would say it would be like a small Vermont town.
Okay.
You walk down Main Street and you don't have to push by anyone.
Did you go, you say you went to Hitler's nest there, so to speak?
Eagle's Nest,
Eagle's
yes.
Nest, is
Yes,
that it?
it had been bombed out thoroughly.
It had been.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I thought they had missed it.
But the Martin Bormann's home had been shattered. We couldn't,
Was there general destruction around Berchtesgaden, or was it just limited to
it was limited to the Eagle's Nest.
the Eagle's Nest? I see. Well, they must have made sure that he didn't return to the Eagle's Nest.
Well, when
Alright.
it started bombing, they dropped the plate glass window, you know, that very large plate glass window that Hitler had so he could look over the Alps.
Oh, yes.
His domain. That had been lowered so that it wouldn't shatter.
I see. All right. What are some of the other cities that now you say Garmisch. Tell us something about Garmisch.
Oh, Garmisch was the 1936 Olympics, Winter Olympics site.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like it was waiting for another Olympics.
Another Olympics. I see.
It seemed to be a bustling little town, and my own facilities were at the base of the ski jump, in front of the railroad station, at a little hotel called the Red Hen.
Mm-hmm.
The people seemed to be friendly enough.
And tell us about, was there any destruction there?
I didn't see any destruction in Garmisch.
Mm-hmm. And what was Garmisch known for so far as the post-war activities are concerned? Was that a rehabilitation area or
Strictly R&R.
R&R, strictly R&R. Okay.
Oh, I also went to the Zugspitze.
Where was that?
That was in the Bavarian Alps as well. And we got stuck on the way down because of a heavy snowstorm. And the train had to stop. It was within minutes, many feet of snow had piled up on the tracks, and it looked like we were going to be there all night.
Okay. Now, when you decided to come back, did you have any idea as to what people were going to ask you when you came back to when you came back to the States?
Yes, I did have a good idea because I was written a letter by the family telling me I had to go to Paris and see my relatives. whom I had never seen.
Mhm.
And I did go twice, and I saw them, and I brought back the news of what I saw. And in addition,
Was there any destruction around there?
um,
Did you see destruction?
yes, I saw destruction along the rail route into Paris.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And was that anywhere near where you met with your relatives?
No, I pulled into the Gare de l'Est, and my relatives were northeast of Paris, so I'd have to take the Gare du Nord train past Le Bourget, as a matter of fact, airfield.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to view Le Bourget?
No, I couldn't see it.
Bourget,
I couldn't see it from the train window.
Okay.
I wanted so much because Lindbergh landed there a year,
Yes.
a month after I was born.
Really?
So that's another reason I wanted to join
Yes.
the Air Corps.
Tell us what the French over there thought about the Americans.
Well, I was biased because when we landed at Le Havre, all the GIs said that the French don't like us.
Yes.
And I didn't personally see that. I saw a little reticence, but I saw and felt no indication, except that there were, when I got into my cousin's town at night, I had to ask for directions, and I felt a little reticence, a little coldness.
You did.
But I couldn't decipher it really when I entered this little cafe.
There was no hostility.
There was no hostility, just coolness.
Did they feel that they were above you in certain ways?
No,
They didn't.
no. If I needed help, for example, in
Did you
getting
speak
directions,
French?
they did.
Do you speak French?
I had high school French.
So were you able to?
I did converse the way strangers do when they really
Okay.
want to make themselves understood.
And did they appreciate the fact that you tried?
They loved it.
They did. Yes. We've had that same experience. When the way you capture these people is to speak their language.
That's right.
Yeah.
You could make all kinds of mistakes and
Yes, but they
lose
forgive
the
you
language, but they
as long as you
appreciate
know that you're trying to speak with them.
Right.
Now, when you returned back to the States, did you have any interest in starting a veterans organization? How did you get interested in the veterans organizations?
Well, I got married and moved to Waltham, and my brother-in-law had already joined the AMVETS, and he said, "Come on, B, you got to join."
Which post is this?
Post
41?
41.
I see. So you've been a member of Post 41 for a long time.
Since they had that facility on Mount Auburn Street.
Isn't that something?
Yes,
That's wonderful.
I believe that was 1960.
And have you held any offices in the post?
No, my duties as scoutmaster and Sunday school teacher took a lot of my time.
Okay. And how did you find the attitude in the post when you first joined it?
Very gung-ho,
They were.
as we used to say in those post-war days.
Yes. Yeah. And what kind of activities did the post run when you were there?
In the 60s, other than Christmas parties, I don't remember.
Did they participate in Memorial Day parades?
Yes.
Did they march?
I marched down Mount Auburn Street myself in this late 60s, 70s, early 70s.
How many members did you have in the post? Any idea?
It was a crowded post meeting room, easily 50 or
100?
so.
No, we have about 100. We have anywhere from 50 to 100 people attending today. Is it about the same?
No, it was less, I believe.
Less
Yeah.
than it is now?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you meet up with any of your service buddies at the post?
As a matter of fact, I did. Gene Caprellian.
I see.
He was one of the fellows I visited in Frankfurt.
Isn't
He
that
was a
something?
friend of my friend.
I
And the
see.
three of us went on to town and had a good time. And to see him again
Yes.
was amazing. And there's another fellow I saw at the post. He was an MP in our town. And one day he stopped me and my buddy because we hadn't voluntarily stopped ourselves because we weren't doing anything.
Yeah, I see.
And, when he found out that who I was,
Okay.
Okay. So when you returned in October '46, you joined the veterans organizations, and of course, the next conflict that came out of that was a Korean conflict, which was quite a bit after that. Did you stay in the reserve at all, or did you just cut all your contacts with the military other than the veterans organization?
Well, the day of my discharge, I had severed all my relations with Uncle Sam. But they took us into a little room, and a nice friendly sergeant came out and spoke to us. The first thing was national service life insurance.
Right.
How many fellows don't smoke here? I raised my hand. He says, well, you easily spend $10 on cigarettes a month. Now, if you buy 20-year life, you'll be sorry if you don't.
Right.
So, I tell you, I spend $119 a year for 20 years on that insurance.
Right.
Today, Uncle Sam pays me twice that
I see.
for staying alive. So I was glad.
All right, so you
And
got national service. Did you get your GI Bill?
I got the GI Bill, but I got something else too.
What's that?
For a little tiny Air Force pin, I got to enlist in the active reserve, and I did duty at Mitchell Field, Long Island.
Oh
New
yes,
York.
I've been there.
And that's the only time I flew in an Air Corps plane.
What
Was
kind?
on reserve duty. There was nothing for me to do when I would go. My military occupational specialty at that time, because I was going to college, was guided missile specialist. But we didn't really have any guided missiles for me to fire off. So,
Yeah.
so they said, take a plane ride with one of the reservists that has to put in time. So I did, and I'm telling you, I regretted doing it because I got airsick. And the reason I got airsick was my pilot spotted a Pepsi-Cola Skyrider, and he got on his tail, and the two of them started dogfighting.
Oh my God. What kind of an aircraft was this?
This was AT-6.
86. Right, right.
And the
This was the
Pepsi-Cola
train.
guy was a
Yeah.
steerman, a biplane, so he
Oh, I
was
see.
much more maneuverable,
I
and
see.
I was getting sick.
So how long did you stay in the reserve, active reserve?
Well, I got married in '49 and kept going down to reserve meetings, and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm leaving my bride home alone, and going into Mitchell Field and killing time, so I'm going to ask to resign. And so little did I know that I couldn't really resign. I could just change from the active reserve status
To the inactive.
to an inactive reserve status, which was a surprise to me when I got my discharge in March of 1953.
And is that when you?
That when I severed all my connection
Okay.
with Uncle Sam, except for the life insurance.
Right. Did you? When you say you used your GI Bill, what did you use your GI Bill for? Where did you go?
I went to college,
Which one?
New York University.
And did you get a degree?
I got a bachelor's degree in the Washington Square College, and then I went on and got a master's degree.
Wonderful.
At
And did you feel
NYU.
the GI Bill, without the GI Bill, could you have done this?
No,
And did you use your GI benefits to purchase a home?
no,
Were there any GI benefits for mortgage, for instance, mortgage benefits?
no,
Okay.
no.
But you used it for the educational benefit?
I used it for the
Okay.
educational benefit.
Were you at all worried that another war would come up?
Yes, when I left the active reserves, Korea was already well involved,
Getting
and
up,
I had no guarantee that I wouldn't be called to active duty,
Okay.
which was a concern of every veteran at that time.
Uh-huh. How did you feel about the war in Korea? Did you feel we should be there? Or did you feel that it should not have been called a police action? Or did you feel that it was really a war that was downgraded to a police action?
I really felt it should not have been called a police action. Our men were dying there, and they were bleeding just like it was a war, so why wasn't it called a war? But I really had second thoughts about MacArthur dropping a bomb, an A-bomb.
Yes, right. Because I think during that war, he had proposed strategic use of small atom bombs.
Yes.
Yeah. So did you support President Truman's discharge of General MacArthur?
I did reluctantly because I really admired MacArthur.
Yes. Okay, well, we're about ending the interview. Is there anything else you'd like to say before he turns off the tape?
Yes, I'd like to say that before I left NYU, I saw MacArthur's triumphant drive down Fifth Avenue, terminating at Washington Square, New York, and I have photographs of him waving to me.
Really?
Yeah. And I want to thank my wife, Helen Sanitarium, for writing to me all the time and sending me food and goodies while I was overseas.
You felt that the American population was supporting its troops?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Well, if that's it, we'll end the interview here. It's been delightful. We've interviewed here for almost 1 hour with V. Sookikian of Waltham, a member of Post 41, and this is Public Information Officer Major Greg Arabian signing off for Post 41 at this time. Thank you. Is that good enough?